Welcome to this FFCON21 panel. My name is Joni Brennan. I'm the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, where we're working to connect the best forces in Canada to advance digital identity that works for everyone. It's my pleasure to be hosting this panel today as moderator. We've got a great panel. We've got with us today RJ Reiser, who is CBDO at Liquid Avatar Technologies. We've got Jay Fischbach, who is CFO at Vector Health Laboratories, and we've got Heather Dahl, who is CEO at Indicio.tech. So with that, let's get into a great discussion today. So first, I'd like to start with get a little bit of the lay of the land. So I'd like to start with you, RJ, and if you could share with us your thoughts on really what is self-sovereign identity and what are verifiable credentials from your view, and what does the audience need to know about them?
Yeah, it's neat that SSI is self-sovereign identity, where you actually put the power and the control of your data back in the hands of the individuals. So the governments have been pushing all kinds of regulations forward, but they missed the technology piece. There was no way to enable these new regulations until today. Now we're leveraging blockchain to enable a self-sovereign identity.
Right, yeah. and like I want to pick up on what RJ said. Like he said, you know, it's a new type of identity that's based on this concept of individual control and human rights. But it's also an approach where identity is designed to address the increasing problem of large organizations controlling the access to our information in the online world and increasingly correlating all that information about us. So where verifiable credentials come in is that it's a crucial technology that's now focuses on international standards to give that ability to present claims about ourselves in a peer-to-peer manner directly from me to you.
Yeah, and in the context of SSI and verifiable credentials, RJ, you mentioned that the policy is there. Do you feel like the policy is ready for this new technology?
Rapidly approaching. I mean, there's some wrinkles we need to iron out, but today there's press releases right now with different ecosystems that are moving forward. And all three of us on this panel have an example of one of those ecosystems that we're moving forward, that if you keep it confined and small enough, you're able to move forward right now and prove the solution versus let's come up with all the information we need to boil the ocean to cover every possible scenario, which we need to get to that point, but let's start small first and prove it out, get a really good success case moving forward. And I think that is the final ingredient that's coming together with the regulations and all these foundations in order to move this thing forward to mainstream.
So, we're definitely talking about a new paradigm shift is what I'm hearing, and, a new approach from a technology perspective, and definitely talking about data and policy and technology and access. So, in the context of making a new paradigm shift and moving to kind of a new way of sharing or verifying information, potentially through SSI, as you've described it, and verifiable credentials. I like to ask Jay a bit about, do you think that, what do you see in terms of society? Do you think that society is ready to make this kind of switch to this idea that you're talking about with digital credentials and digital verifications?
Sure, thanks, Joni. I think part of society is, and we've had this discussion certainly among the three of us in the past, where there's a part of society today that really shares a huge component of their online life already. I think the trouble is that governments have basically taken a back seat in the development and rollout of how to govern that component. So you look at the United States, President Biden, I think it was stated in late March that his administration is leaving like COVID credentials, which is right in front of us right now. It's all part of within the private sector. It's not been managed from an oversight perspective at the national levels. I think there's another good piece from Jenny Wagner, who's Director of Programs at the Linux Foundation for Public Health, said, it's important, what's necessary to get this going is make sure it works and make sure things are interoperable and make sure that we're going forward with the move fast but don't break things philosophy. We don't want to go too quickly. And I think to build on what RJ was talking about, and some of the things that, between Vector, Liquid Avatar, and Indicio we're working on today is COVID credentials. We have COVID testing facilities here in Toronto. We're working with both individuals and businesses and some of the public health components in Ontario. We want to get to a point where we can not just issue a result and send it off into the ether and hope that those individuals have smartphones, can use it, but we want to be able to send them an actual credential that is recognized in a broad spectrum of locations.
To add to that, all of us have done some work with different government entities that have done surveys, and their surveys have come back overwhelmingly positive that the constituents are all eager and ready to move forward with a verifiable credential that is more secure than the paper. Their biggest issue is trust. Who's going to run it? What is that entity that's going to be behind it? And we believe it's going to be an open standard run by some of these foundations that'll address that trust question.
So I suppose that, what you're really talking about is a mix of open standards and open source, similar family of types of tools in the toolbox. And I think, so for, from our side at the DIAC, we're very, we're neutral on these positions, but we're really looking at what are the functionalities and what are people thinking. And we have seen that COVID, through some survey and research that we've done, we have seen that COVID has driven more demand for digital identity, particularly people who are caring for children and who are caring for adults, whether those seniors are in the home or somewhere else. And so there is a demand for convenience around this, but I do think that what you said about trust is accurate. And so, kind of building that trust. And so, what do we think about people who are, part of that digital divide or digital literacy? I'll give you an example. Here in British Columbia, we've seen, I saw in the newspaper a few weeks back that restaurants were considering, could they use these type of credentials to reopen more quickly? However, restaurants are not sure, do they have the mandate to say that they can use those credentials? And what does that look like? So what do you think about the digital divide and how we, how will the digital divide and that education and trust be addressed? That can be Jay or any of you.
Sure. I think, so interesting point on trust in restaurants and COVID. So today, why did we choose at Vector? Why did we choose, to go with a partner like Liquid Avatar, like Indicio? We're building out, a wallet application to allow our users the trusted credential that they can then go and use at a restaurant. Within our perimeter, not only are we giving you trusted credentials, but we're actually also working with other partners that will allow the restaurant owner and all the patrons to feel trust when they walk in. How? Well, maybe they tap their wallet on a device when you walk in. Let's call it any payment device, or they take a snapshot of a QR code, for example. We at Vector and certainly I know with Liquid Avatar, we're looking at bringing all of those components within what we call our perimeter, and that just enables even more levels of trust. I think certainly at the end consumer level, at the shopper level, at the staff level in those stores. And then on the top line, I'd say, it gives it a lot better levels of trust when you're using partners that are also involved in the global framework. So, whether it's in the Trust Over IP Foundation, for example, that's setting standards for schemas, so that as we build things out, we'll be able to be a little more interoperable with everything else.
And I want to pick up on what Jay said about trust and the consumer, and also talking about the digital divide. One of the themes is we hear these conversations like we're having today, and we're wondering, is this real? Are people out there using it? And what I just returned from was project, because in Indicio, and this is why we've partnered with RJ and Jay, is because at Indicio we have on the ground experience in deploying these solutions. And so I just returned from a trial project with the government of Aruba and CETA, which is the airline technology provider. And there they ran a trial using verifiable credentials for travelers who were arriving to the island, but also then went to restaurants and venues and casinos. And part of that trial was, one, working with the customers and observing how they use this technology, and two, actually interviewing the people who were involved in the project. And what was astounding was the level of emotion of the people involved who one, saw the value. It brought additional trust about their confidence about the data, because in this case, the government of Aruba was issuing the traveler credential, and what that meant to them about their future of opening their businesses, of going into these venues as a visitor, and starting to get their lives back to a little bit more normal than they would have otherwise, and the amount of appreciation for what a verifiable credential did, because at the end of the day, they all talked about their privacy and the ability to control who has access and who they could share that information with. And it was, I've been working in this for a long time, like Joni has. It was striking the level of emotion and trust that people had in those verifiable credentials in a way that they don't have in their usual apps that they engage with.
So that's an interesting story. I'm curious, Heather, about the Aruba, experience. Was there a pre-education component, do you know about, that they did with these people? Because it sounds like they had really interesting answers. Was there a ramp up?
No, there was no pre-education component other than some original, do you want to join this trial? You'll try out a way to reopen the island. And there were also people who just walked up and said, I want to participate. So the pre-education was pretty minimal. But when RJ talks about starting with smaller projects, smaller ecosystems, so we can learn from it, that's exactly what this project did, and why it's so valuable for what RJ and Jay are doing moving forward, because they're taking from those lessons learned from that smaller project and moving it forward into their work. And the goal is, with verifiable credentials in the open source community and the open standards community that we all learn from each other, to move this technology forward.
Yeah.
To add to that, so
go ahead.
Yeah, this is the digital divide. If we had the silver bullet for it, we'd handle the divide across all kinds of different aspects. We don't know how to address it. But my getting into the open source and open standards, I think it's the first step, because you can't limit or block anyone for participating. So my understanding is that in other countries, third world countries, the citizenry actually use cell phone minutes as a currency, right? Because no one could block them from doing it. So if we have this open standard around a digital credential, a verifiable credential, what other entities out there can leverage that open standard? There's no barrier of entry, and provide these solutions to individuals that may not have access to it. We've tried to start that with all the individuals that don't have a government issued credential. Our level 1 credential is based on your biometrics. So even if you don't have that credential, you can still get a biometric credential that proves that you are the individual that owns that agent on the network, and get services like a COVID test or a vaccination without a government identity. That's the first step. And we have other divides that we have to worry about. Well, what if they don't have internet service? What if they don't have a device? There's lots of things that I know all of us are concerned with and want to try to address. But I think this open standard and some of these procedures that we're already following, I think, are going to point us in the right direction.
Right. When we have success in the happy path, it creates the lessons that we need to know to create the path for those who don't have internet connection or those who don't have devices. And so we can learn from that. And it's something that every organization that's working this is committed to continually discussing. What do we do to address the digital divide, and how can we continue to roll this out, whether that be creating custodial agents, whether that's tying it to plastic cards or paper cards for those that don't have technology, or tying it to biometrics. But there is a path that we're starting to pave forward. We don't have the firm answer today, but I have no doubt that as we continue to move forward, that direction will become much more clear to all of us.
So, you know, one of the reasons in Canada we've been working as a community, federal government, provincial governments, and private sector to deliver and establish a pan-Canadian trust framework, I think is part of this conversation. So, you know, a point was put up around that there would be no barriers to entry. And so, what about the thought about let's shift a little bit to what government's perspectives might be. And when you're speaking, if you're speaking in government in general, but if you're thinking about a particular government, thanks for qualifying that. I think, you know, is it a possibility that the no barrier to entry is both a benefit, but also something that can be of concern of governments in terms of what are the rules of the road? What are the barriers? How will people manage these types of credentials? So with all of that considered, and again, that's one of the reasons where we have this, you know, our Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, with all of that considered, what do you think is the likelihood of governments, you know, having the understanding or the comfort zone that they are looking for to issue those credentials, and kind of what would the rules of the road look like in terms of where and how those credentials are used, how people are protected, are they not protected? So let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing from a government perspective. And go ahead.
Where I sit and talking with governments around the world, I'm very optimistic because they have the understanding that they can't boil the ocean to begin with, but they need to start with small projects moving forward. And then as they discover what they need to know, then they start taking those and apply it to, like you say, making sure that everyone has access to self-sovereign identity credentials. But they understand that the first most important part is proving out their initial use cases. Why verifiable credentials with governments? Because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution on what type of information they need. Where governments struggle is when there's identity solutions, especially around COVID, that take the decision-making process away from the government and give a red or green light. Governments need a variety of different information and data points about an individual, and every government's slightly different on what they need. And so what verifiable credentials does is it allows each government to customize to meet their regulations while being able to accept people from different countries, and those people can take their credentials elsewhere. So it allows governments the flexibility that they need to meet their regulatory requirements today. And they're working and committed to making sure that everyone, regardless of whether they have technology or they have devices, will be able to use it as they continue to roll out phases of their projects.
Yeah, I think also, you know, to build on that, when you look across, you know, I'll take Canada as the example because I live here. When you look across provincially, many of the provinces today are involved in various groups that are trying to set a standard. And, you know, as Heather said, whether that standard is slightly different or that schema is slightly different, they're actually all, it certainly seems from my perspective that they're all moving forward in order to try and issue something. I mean, we have government IDs today, you know, driver's license, an access card, a passport. Yeah, it's a hard piece of paper, government controlled. It's nothing to say that those things can't be turned into a verifiable credential. They're verifiable credentials right now. They're just used in a different manner. You know, COVID being one, or health. I would actually bundle it all as your health credential. I think is playing a, COVID is driving a lot of discussion around health credentials and what does that mean. Giving the power back to the individual is really important. You know, I don't know for others, but getting your health record is not the easiest thing to get from your doctor. And your doctor is the one that controls it. I don't want my doctor controlling it. I want to be able to share that one kernel of information with, you know, someone else in my health community that can help make a decision. To be able to get all of that today, super difficult and costly. It's paper, it's fax, what have you. I'm super excited about, certainly about the province of Ontario, the province of BC, Alberta, super progressive provincial governments that are moving forward in the right direction to try and help set standards so that we can actually get beyond health credentials into other components.
Yeah, so I want to challenge that a little bit. Let's stay in this topic, and you know, maybe we'll come back to RJ in terms of you know, if we're looking at the lens in the Canadian context as an example, you know, that there is the COVID alert app in Canada, a piece of technology that's meant to help with notifications around contact tracing. And for example, here in British Columbia, the health authorities have not approved that application. And so while, you know, you can kind of look on Twitter and around the internet, you can see people talking about the COVID alert app, and even in the federal budget, lots of money put into the COVID alert app. The COVID alert app doesn't exist for us here in British Columbia, partly a health authority around data and access to data decisions. So if we come back to RJ, what about, you know, I think what we're kind of talking about here is the notion of ownership or control, and, you know, do we see the authority to act yet ubiquitously from a lot of these credentials that we're referencing, like health cards? Many of the credentials we're referencing are government issued health in Canada, at least health card, passport, driver's license, maybe not health card in the US, but largely these are government issued credentials. So RJ, what about the notion of ownership or not and authority to act, kind of maybe coming back where we started on policy?
Absolutely. So most of my exposure in Canada would be in the Ontario government. It's really impressive with the level of research that they've done, and also the type of credentials that they want to issue, all the way from, you know, building permits, driver's license, all the different services. And their key here is they want to be able to improve their efficiency of their services and all their licensing by using verifiable credentials, but also reducing the amount of fraud. So because of the way it's set up with the open standard, the cost for somebody to create a fake or fraudulent document or credential is so great that the desire to do it gets minimized in a hurry. It doesn't make any sense to spend X amount of dollars, a huge amount of money to get one credential. Whereas a paper-based credential, we can go to a local print shop and figure that piece out. And so the governments are really progressive, trying to figure out where these pieces fit in. This is where all three of us have kind of played in that arena, where we've kind of come to the conclusion is, let's get some pilots together, just like what Indicio is doing in Aruba, just like what we're doing with Indicio and Vector and these health credentials. Let's keep it small and prove the solution. Because one thing that I found is that nobody wants to go first and have it crash, have the thing blow up and take all the heat. They want to be number 3, number 4. They want other groups to lead it and show the path. Ontario's in that position where they're ready to move forward. My opinion is they want some more proof points, and this team on the phone here are putting them together so we can prove it out.
Yeah, fascinating. So any other thoughts from the panel on kind of where we are? Authority to act wise?
I follow along the lines with RJ. Is it's important to get out there, build, learn, iterate, build, improve, because that's the only way we're going to move forward and be able to fully realize the potential and the power of the verifiable credential. And I believe with success, governments and other organizations will continue to join the efforts because they'll gain more confidence in the system by seeing others who have worked towards realizing their proof of concepts, use cases, and projects.
Thanks, Heather. And we're nearly done with our conversation. I can't believe it. Jay, any final thoughts from your side on closing the last gap here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, we're excited where things are going. You know, I'm really excited with some of the partnerships we have, certainly with RJ and Heather on what's going to come out in Ontario from a COVID credential perspective. We hope to get that out soon, and I think that will be a forerunner to many other components, certainly in the healthcare space.
Yeah. So I appreciate the time and the digging in on the some of those harder issues around the policy. So as we wrap up here with our final words from the panel, I wonder if you can give just in a couple of sentences actionable advice for the audience leaving the conference, and maybe let's start with RJ and then Heather and Jay.
Actionable advice. God, that's a good question. So I think that, you know, this whole process is inevitable, these verifiable credentials, because they're more secure, and it puts the power in the hands of the users, so they control their data workflow. And we'll be releasing here soon some test sites. So just like when we leveraged other blockchain type technologies, you get really nervous because it's very permanent, where you'd go and you do some sample transactions, leverage the blockchain to make sure you're doing it correctly and how it works. In the next 2 weeks or so, we will have a similar site where you can use your COVID credential, test it, see what it looks like, see how it works, and you're keeping it inside your own environment. So as this stuff rolls out, don't be afraid of it, embrace it, because it gives the consumer the power.
Thanks, RJ. Heather, 1 minute actionable advice.
Yeah. The Linux Foundation Public Health has approved Cardia, which is an open source ecosystem for health credentials. Come join the working group. You'll join RJ and Jay as a part of that group so we can work together in creating the future and learn with each other.
That's great. And Jay, last word, actionable advice for the audience.
Absolutely. Trust is important. Holding your own credentials is important. I would, you know, as Heather said, read as much as you can, join an action working group if you're interested. Don't give your credentials out to anybody. You know, you need to own your own identity.
Yeah, that's you know, it's fascinating. And so you know, I appreciate the time of the panel today. I want to thank the FFCON21 for putting together this great panel. SSI and verifiable credentials are certainly an interesting topic, and so hope the audience will take the time to follow up on the actionable advice and the different, you know, the views and perspectives that were provided in this panel today. Certainly digital identity is what we see, at least in our research at DIAC, is 75% of Canadians that we've surveyed believe that COVID has pushed Canadians to really look for digital identity now more than ever. So this is a time of progress, and it's important that we work together and collaborate to make this work happen. So it was a pleasure to hear your views and to have this conversation. Once again, I'm Joni Brennan from the Digital ID, the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, the DIAC. If you want to learn more about us, please look us up online. I'd like to thank RJ Reiser from CBDO, Liquid Avatar Tech, Jay Fischbach, CFO, Vector Health Laboratories, and Heather Dahl, CEO, Indicio.tech. And I hope you have a great rest of your conference and think critically about these issues. And if you do anything, get involved in digital identity. It's certainly a space that needs more support in all directions, policy, business, and technology for sure. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your conference.